This is a text-to-speech presentation. The original one was in Hungarian language. The text-to-speech software was from imtranslator.com.
Iron ring, made of wood. Dijkstra wrote the following in 1972, "The major cause of the software crisis is that the machines have become several orders of magnitude more powerful. To put it quite bluntly, as long as there were no machines, programming was no problem at all. Now we have gigantic computers, programming has become an equally gigantic problem. The computer is a dumb tool that executes in sequence the statements that are fed into it. To have something flexibly changing turning out of this, that's something like iron ring, made of wood." There are two things that mislead us in relation with the fact that this still seems to be more and more flexible. The computer operates very quickly, and this is many times almost the synonym of flexibility, but it is completely different. The other is that the complexity of software is continuously increasing, and this complexity is shielding the dumbness. So the complexity, that is one of the reasons for the crisis, is continuously increasing. But through this the flexibility will increase, so the systems will have a relatively higher affinity towards changes. And now there's not only a software crisis, we have tolerated that quite well for more than 30 years, but there's a much more serious crisis to which many people say that afterwards it will certainly not be as it was before. So this is not a crisis like the ones before that we will survive, cough a little bit, and then the whole thing goes forward. But it will certainly not be as it was before. So a model change is necessary in many courses of business, and the question is how can we, as IT, handle this flexibly? Many words have already been spent on rules and regulations today. I'd also like to talk some more about this now. I'll skip now this piece about T-logic briefly. I've already made this presentation elsewhere, but I'll say as much as belongs to this topic. With the increase of complexity, those working in the IT industry have to be more and more prepared. So knowledge and practice start to become extremely important. Here I used to bring the example that you can walk very far by foot, with a relatively low level of knowledge, but if we want to travel much faster by plane, then a completely different type of knowledge is necessary for that. You need to invest an insane amount in this, and even so it seems to be so hopeless to be able to follow this very quickly changing information technology industry that doesn't change for its own sake. I don't know how well you remember, it was exactly in the 90s, maybe many of you remember that, there was a tendency that technology is not important, it's important what the business value is. That was when the banks for example piled up different systems in a way that business areas ordered this and that and the other, because that's good for them, they would like to see it exactly the way that system shows it, and that's a very good thing. Now the operations problems of the surely showed up very strongly, Gabor can confirm this, and especially the integration problems when not only individual departments required an application but they had to think in some bigger picture. In 2009 T-Logic had the most WebSphere and Rational certifications in Hungary, we are a little bit proud of it. This is not a thing of great significance, but at least it tells something about the intention how we handle this technology. So if the technical knowledge is not there, then there's no use in understanding the business requirements. However, there's no doubt at all that if the technical knowledge is there, but we cannot understand the business requirements or we cannot make the partner make us understand the requirements, then certainly the business IT alignment that appears very frequently in relation with the SOA paradigm is not realized. How are we a little different also for example in the area of business analysis? These all are things that one can interpret positively or negatively. And I don't claim that this is clearly positive or negative, I just say that it's different. So when we try to understand the situation and we try to apply the 80-20 approach, then we have to assume a lot of conflicts. We are not asking the way clients like it, and not when they like it, and we do this guided by good intentions because we think the project may be completed this way. This figure suggests that this is not some kind of waterfall thing, so one where we start to analyze, then we design, develop, and test, but it is a continuous cycle. Business users don't like it either, because they think the project is here now, Let's put large burdens on this carriage now, many times in a way that it's guaranteed that it cannot be moved. We think this is a continuous improvement, a continuous cycle, and this is in contradiction with many things. It is in contradiction with the fixed price approach, with 1,000 things. I don't want to enumerate them. All I can say to this is that I don't think it can work differently. Somehow the people representing IT have to find out these things somehow, and if there is no appropriate client commitment and management commitment for it, then we simply cannot complete these things. Our in-house developments are also agile, and the things you have heard and seen may make you think, how is a company of 40 people develop 3 products of this size and capacity? Because we work roughly based on these principles, so we haven't planned on paper 10 years ago what Timon will achieve in 10 years. But at the client site we are working as agile as it is possible there, we strive for it of course. The thing that differentiates us from the agile approach is that we consider modeling to be very important. I'll come back to this from the point of view of handling the software crisis. In reality it can be made quicker on the one hand by increasing the technology knowledge, on the other hand by trying to work based on a methodology we believe in. And finally, the third very essential thing is to separate the things that are worth done very thoroughly, in a durable way, because they are changing slowly, and the things we mustn't spend much time on, because life overwrites them tomorrow anyhow. Obviously it has to be ensured at each point of this process that it should be quick. It's no use to have quick development if afterwards it waits for a month for an integration test environment, or a deployment waits for 2 weeks, or finding a small bug in the integration test environment takes days. Obviously everything is interconnected with everything, so this way we cannot deploy releases in weekly or bi-monthly cycles. Yes, what we like at customers, this is a very delicate question, the strategic participant. I heard a very interesting presentation the day before yesterday at the bank sector event from Peter Felgsutti, CEO of Raiffeisen Bank. He said something that made me think, managers are also just employees, so actually they represent strategic interests only indirectly. In the light of this the question is much more interesting. The slide was made earlier. How can the strategic participant be named, or how can the contact to him be kept? Anyhow, when raising questions, when we try to maintain the contact with the business area and we talk to all these people here, then it becomes clear who are those really want something, where does it hurt, who has ideas, or who are those who are just interested, so those who say, how good would it be if I had a word, if I knew something about it, and if I were asked, I'd have ideas, too. By the way, all people are like this. If I asked them, then it would be a shame for them not to have an idea. I tell you, we shouldn't ask them, because they will have ideas that will make the task too defined, so we include problems that we need to handle later. So we select him, this great man, and the others will be sad. We need to be able to handle this, the sad people, and the opponents where applicable. What is it that is forbidden to ask even from the strategic participant? We have to ask such questions if we expect to be praised, how well we are planning, how well we are doing. But we have no part in this, we have to renounce to this, don't count on ever having such a thing, and this is a very silly question. As a maximum he will think about it, asking himself whether the fact that we designed such a good bridge will cost him more or not. And he will say, no, that pillar is not necessary, we just need to cross it securely. And if we accept it like this and we cannot contradict, and we agree, then this is the consequence approximately, and the responsibility is ours of course. There are several stakeholders and clients in a complicated project. Let's assume in an ideal case that there is some strategic direction, this is marked by the dotted line, and there are all sorts of stakeholders. There are louder participants and there are softer ones, but if there really is a strategic guideline, they must be able to refer to it, and they have to try to reject somehow these diverging directions. Obviously this works only with many conflicts and many difficulties. We used to like very much in case of an agile methodology that we can get from one phase to the other in small steps, iteratively. But usually we are forced into situations where the phase development is also regarded as iterative development. This is what I try to illustrate here. If a company has certain time, some money, some resources for achieving something, that needs to be scheduled in a way that something is completed in that time. If it is visible that it can only be half completed, then I think this is not the thing that should be started. If there is enough momentum to be able to carry through the whole thing, then it can also be a good approach, but if there isn't, and we end up with practically spending spectacular amounts of money and still not being able to cross the bridge, then this project has to be stopped. Another possibility is that we build some small bridge with a given momentum, one that we can cross, and if possible we continue this. I'm not a bridge construction expert, so maybe it's not possible to build bridges next to each other. I just wanted to illustrate that this direction can be validated with further momentums, further requirements. It's very difficult to fight. It's not easy. There are plenty of such half-done bridges. So if we want to explain why a high percentage of projects is shut down, not now, so not in the crisis when they like to shut down projects, but generally, then actually this is behind it. They are slipping, consume a lot of money, and still there's nothing coming out of it, then it's worth stopping. This slide takes us again to the question whether we can separate the things that change and the ones that don't change that much. These two characters are standing next to a belt and they have some task, to stamp some parcel later. The essence of all this is that I'd like to illustrate that the tasks in a process are usually pretty stable, they have to be executed. But the fact that the character called teller will stamp with red, then the branch manager with blue, this is their process and later it will change. On the next slide the branch manager stamps first with blue, and then the mid-officer with red. The tasks remain the same, just the order is different, and they are executed by others. So the tasks are stable in the life cycle of the process, that is what needs to be executed. The thing that frequently changes is who has to execute it, when it has to be executed, and all these are built rule-based. Based on our experience so far we could determine about BPEL process controllers that they basically provide a better support for the production line type of operation. The one when the tasks to be executed follow each other in a strict sequence. Banking processes are usually not like this. Many tasks can be executed in parallel, many can be executed in advance and many fall in, like a new document arrives and something has to be done with it. It's almost impossible to handle this in BPEL branches. At the same time it is very easy to model, to set up the rules, what are the preconditions of an executable task and what is the end result. The task doesn't change but the preconditions change pretty frequently. So the precondition of a task can change in a way that from now on there should be 2 approvals before it, not 1. If we separate this part in a way that there are stable tasks, and we can build the task flexibly, using rules, then we can make a very big step in the direction of flexibility using the rule-based approach. I don't make a secret out of it that the business model change means systems of rules for me. So if somebody speaks about a business model, about what I want to sell, through which channel, to whom, under what conditions, and how do I want to handle this? If I follow the rule-based approach, then it is clear that tasks are very good candidates for becoming SOA services, since they are reusable in different phases of the process, they can be called multiple times, respectively we can create business rules for who has to execute it, whom we need to distribute the task, who has permission for it, because all these are interrelated questions. Now how does the regulation work in this crisis situation? How did the regulation work so far? Here you can see the regulator device. This is the invisible hand, and how the invisible hand regulates, say, the blowing up of the balloon. It's an interesting thing that if one blows the balloon, it's easier and easier to blow. At the beginning it's pretty difficult to blow, then it becomes easier and easier. This is the counterexample for electronic regulation, where the essence is that if something starts to reach a limit, then it should be more and more difficult to modify it. This was a good example. the more credit requests, the more credits appeared on the market, that itself served as cover for new credit requests, so it increased the balloon very nicely, and we who aren't economists, we thought that of course something will regulate this. We watched with amazement how nicely the engine was spinning, and then came the invisible hand. And the whole thing exploded. Electrical engineers don't call this regulation. Regulation is called this one, a variety of control where the provision and the intervention occurs depending on the deviation, meaning, based on the difference between the actual and prescribed values of the regulated characteristic intended to be controlled. And I think, and it was also part of the presentation of Peter Felczewski, that many regulations will follow now, and it will be more and more frequent that we have to comply quickly with different newer and newer regulations. How does this work paper-based? Referring back to the presentation of Peter Felczewski, he said that only the state interventions can work together in a counter-cyclical way with these mechanisms that created these processes, so practically the balloon. This was a denied paradigm so far. Everybody was referring to Adam Smith and the invisible hand he described in Wealth of Nations 200 years ago. He was convinced that such interventions are not necessary. It is interesting, and I did a little reading on it, that Adam Smith's assumptions, the ones he based this theory on, are not fulfilled in the current era. So this was something like trying to apply Newton's mechanical laws under relativistic circumstances. It assumes, for example, that everybody participates in the social processes with good manners. I don't know why this could be assumed. It assumes the hunger for profit. This is trivial and means no problem if it goes together with good manners. It assumes that they are well informed and have interests as owners. It simply cannot be attained that they are well informed, because people don't have enough information to understand how the world economy works. Interest as owners, given the reasons mentioned before, that large companies are controlled by managers, and managers don't have interest as owners, and it cannot be brought in sync very easily. So the question of regulations will be very hard, and yes, the instructions can be sent on paper to these branch agents. One of them understands quickly, the other one has a somewhat slower understanding, and also misunderstands the text a little bit. The third one has a very quick understanding, but he immediately realizes that it can be violated. And of course it has to be distributed in many places, but then how can this be verified? Well, we can place big brothers behind it, and then we need more big brothers, and they will watch whether it works. Well, I don't think a flexible business model change can be done this way. But how? I've mentioned at the beginning that we attach great importance to modeling. These entity models are not something I'd say the business user should create, but they can really understand them. So if somebody sits next to them, and shows them that this is the client, the account belongs to that, etc. These are simple things the user can understand. Overall, of course, it's very complicated, and the thing becomes interesting if actually a code executable by IT means is generated out of it. So for example, a database model or an object model, and we are doing it like this. It is very interesting, and again it's an interesting part of the recognition how this will be faster, how we will be different. This part is very stable, this is hardly changing. For example, if you think it through, now there is a crisis, and everybody is talking about business model change, but nobody is talking about exchanging their core systems. So it doesn't come to anybody's mind that this would be the solution. So it's worth investing in this, it's worth doing it very well. However, it's very random what kind of rules are functioning in these, and I think here is the possibility to be able to implement the business model change efficiently and quickly. How does such a thing work? There's a small character here, but you can safely replace it with a program or a process and a given point of the process where the query starts from. The question is really only that I am this and this decision point and tell me whether it is possible. So the requester doesn't really have to know anything, only which decision point it is, and a rule should be identified for this decision point. From here on I can rewrite this rule every day, I can create a new one every day. The business model, the entity model will most probably not change. The big thing is that it doesn't pass a context. Please evaluate this, as usually rule engines do, but it sits on this entire model that contains, for example, 1000 entities with their x thousand attributes, and then we can create rules for these. I think we are now totally unique on the software market with this. The answer can be not only authorized or not authorized. This is generally possible in case of each rules engine, but this can tell what the reason for rejection is. This is not at all trivial. Moreover, the evaluation of conditions for granting the permission is quite complicated. Procedural or imperative rule engines are not suitable. We always have great problems with explaining what a declarative and an imperative rule engine is, and I don't know now whether this is a good example because this is so simple that it's disturbing. So I brought one more example. The essence of a declarative rule is that we define the permitted values of a given attribute. Now how is this done with an imperative or procedural rule? There we define the algorithm using which it can be determined whether the given value is permitted or not. For example, it can look like this. The first 5 natural numbers are those that are greater than 0 and less than 6. These two may seem to be the same, but if one rule is asked what are the permitted values, then it happily tells you it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's listed there. However, the other one says it cannot be queried. Instead, it evaluates the algorithm to determine the first 5 natural numbers and checks whether it is part of that given number. I don't know whether the difference is perceptible, but it is a cardinal difference. This is a little more complicated example, but it's still very simple. We have traffic lights and a car. We approach the lights and we should decide whether we need to brake or not. There are 3 parameters: the color of the lights, the stopping distance, and whether we are using distinguishing signs or not. Now I say in a very simplified way that an imperative rule cannot be evaluated even if the lights are green, because the other 2 parameters are missing. So think through that it cannot be evaluated. Therefore, what algorithm is written for the different sections of the process? When you only see the lamp, query the lamp only, at the next query more. Or write a rule where you code in what happens if you only know the properties of the lamp, what if you only know the stopping distance, or a combination of these. This is a significantly more complicated procedural algorithm, and what's the problem with it? It can be coded this way. The issue is if, for example, the lights are red and it is not using distinguishing signs but the stopping distance isn't calculated yet. We want to handle all this in one rule, so what does the imperative rule say to this? For example, we don't want to calculate the stopping distance yet because, say in this example, we imagine that it is a very complicated calculation. It depends on the age of the tires, kilometers traveled, road surface, etc. The imperative engine gives an error in such a case because the parameters, used for calculating whether it can pass or not, are not available. The declarative engine of course says the lights are red, no distinguishing sign is used, so we don't calculate the stopping distance. I am explaining the same thing from a different point of view, but I don't want to tell it here. I think this is either understandable here or it isn't, so I'd rather skip this. Then I'd tell you that we regard a very important part of the business model, what products we want to sell, as a set of rules. The set of rules operates on well-defined entities, so it can be modeled, still it is very variable. The statement is that the system of conditions can be stored in these TCPS rules in a way that it can be queried whether all conditions needed for selling or for applicability are fulfilled, which of them are not fulfilled, what changes could be done, what attempts can be made in order to fulfill them. I don't want to continue mentioning this example with the lamps, but is it understandable why this cannot be retrieved from an imperative rule engine? We've been recently to the yearly European conference of a renowned software manufacturing company, and we've watched the presentations of their newly bought rule engine product with great interest. We asked them many questions. We tried to inquire about these things we think others don't know, to see how much they don't know it. The answer was, the presenter was already a little nervous. Please understand, these are complicated things. You can't expect such things from a rule engine. that made me so comfortable that we are on the right path with this thing. So these are our questions that arise in our current processes, the ones that are not rule-based. Did we obey the conditions according to the regulation? On an earlier slide we had a little bit silly agent, and a little malevolent one. How can we verify this? Can we keep under control the allowable deviations? Can we react to these? This is the real question. So if we see that our processes start heading to the wrong direction, our portfolio evolves differently compared to our objectives, then can we introduce more strict conditions, or exclude some temporarily? How much time is it to train and enforce this? Beyond our own regulations, can we quickly introduce and include the legal provisions of the superior authorities? Much later the question of audit comes up here too. Can we answer the questions like based on which rules, as a consequence of which rules have we approved or rejected? Usually there is not such a big deal if we reject, the problem used to be if we approve. In case of deviations from the regulation, is it possible to tell the difference between benevolent mistakes and malevolent fraud? So this is what the T-Logic product book would like to ensure as a part of the business model. This is where we say that if we store the things sent and communicated on paper in a complex, understandable model, understandable rules that can be validated by the business, in a formalized and historical, up-to-date but traceable way, then these will be retrievable by IT applications, and we'll be able to answer all these questions I have pursued in relation with declarativity. Under the current circumstances, so before the balloon exploded, practically it happened really nicely that we far exceeded our possibilities. We didn't really want to hold the constraints under control, but even if we had wanted to, it would have been difficult, because there were other interests also involved in the usage of these possibilities by us. Now of course the situation is much worse. The CEO of CIB Bank said recently that they are almost desperately looking for clients whom they could lend to, so it is obvious what they are looking for, a business model, what can be sold to whom. It would be good to reach the point where we had real walls, or at least the supposed walls that we set up based on our model. Obviously the status is simple if it's static, but this will continuously move until the appropriate state of equilibrium is reached. Respectively the state of equilibrium will continuously change. So there is a very narrow hedge at the border between possibilities and constraints. The world will not exist without lending either, so the economic processes will not really start without lending, so the point of view that the role of the banks as financial intermediaries is something useless or devilish is very primitive. There is a pressing need for it. I think the fact that this is expected to still be on a very low level in 2010 reflects that this model change, the search, and the science of economics, the macroeconomy is currently being re-evaluated. I said that Adam Smith is the father of the modern science of economics, and I'm asking immediately, just so in a very provocative way, is there any modern science of economics now? So how painful this model change will be and how it will be performed. I think IT can help a lot with solutions of the type that I tried to highlight here. These are the things I have talked about and I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I know I said many provoking things, and I am happy to discuss or dispute these questions with you. Even now if you have questions, I'll take them.